Welcome to the Forest of Luck story. It is very interesting story. Please ready for listen.
Once, two wealthy friends got into a lively argument. One said that to become rich a man needed to start with some money. The other said that to become rich all a man needed was luck. They argued for a long time. Finally, they decided that if they could find an honorable man, he might be able to prove who was right. One day, while they were traveling through a small village, they noticed a miller who was grinding corn and wheat. They paused and asked the man about his work. The miller told them that he worked for a boss and that he earned only 50 cents a day, with which he had to support a family of 5. The friends were surprised. "Are you saying that you can support a family of 5 on only $15 a month?" one man asked. "I live modestly to make ends meet," the humble miller replied. The two friends spoke privately and agreed that this man might be able to help them resolve their argument. "I'm going to make you an offer," one of them said to the miller. "I will give you $200, and you may do whatever you want with the money." "But why would you give me that money when you've just met me?" the miller asked. One man explained, "My friend and I have been arguing about something for a long time. He says that to become rich all a man needs is luck. I say that to become rich a man needs to start with a good amount of money. By giving you this money, perhaps we can settle our argument. Here, take it, and do whatever you want with it." So the miller took the money and spent the rest of the day thinking about the strange meeting during which he had received more money than he had ever seen. When the day's work was done, the miller decided the first thing he would be to buy food for his family. He took out $10 and wrapped the rest of the money in a piece of cloth and put the bundle of money in his bag. Then he went to the market and bought supplies and a piece of meat to take home for dinner. On the way home, he was attacked by a hawk that had smelled the meat which the miller was carrying. The miller fought off the bird, but in the struggle the miller dropped the bag. Before the miller knew what was happening, the hawk grabbed the bag with the bundle of money and flew off with it. "Ah," moaned the miller, "I should have let that hungry bird have the meat. I could have bought a lot more meat with the money he took. Unfortunately, now I'm as poor as I was before. And worse, because now those two men will say I am a thief." The miller gathered his supplies, continued on his way home, and told his wife the entire story when he arrived. When he was finished telling his story, his wife said, "We have always been poor, but perhaps someday our luck will change." The next day the miller went to work as usual, and before long he forgot the entire matter. Part 2. 3 months after he had lost the money to the hawk, the two wealthy men returned to the village. As soon as they saw the miller, they approached him and asked him if his luck had changed. When the miller saw them, he felt ashamed and was afraid they would think that he had squandered the money on worthless things. But he decided to tell them the truth, and so he told them the story. The men believed him. In fact, the one who insisted that it was money and not luck that made a man prosper took out another $200 and gave it to the miller. "Let's try again," he said, "and let's see what happens this time." The miller didn't know what to think. He said, "You are very kind, but maybe it would be better if you gave this money to another man." "No," the man insisted. "I want to give it to you because you are an honest man, and if we are going to settle our argument, you have to take the money." The miller thanked them and promised to do his best. Then as soon as the two men left, He began to think about what to do with the money so that it wouldn't disappear again. The thing to do was to take the money straight home. He took out $10, wrapped the rest in a cloth, and immediately headed home. When he arrived, his wife wasn't in the house. At first, he didn't know what to do with the money. He went to the pantry where he kept a large clay jar filled with grain. That was as safe a place as any to hide the money, he thought. So he emptied out the grain and put the bundle of money at the bottom of the jar. Then he covered the money with the grain so that it was hidden. Satisfied that the money was safe, he returned to work. That afternoon when he arrived home from work, he was greeted by his wife. "Look," she said, very pleased, "today I bought some paint to paint the house." "And how did you buy paint since we don't have any money?" he asked. "Well, the man who was selling the paint was willing to trade for jewelry, money, or anything of value," she said. "The only thing we had of value was the jar full of grain, so I traded it for the paint. Isn't it wonderful? I think we have enough paint to paint these 2 rooms." "What have you done?" groaned the man. "We're ruined again." "But why?" she asked, unable to understand his anguish. "Today I met the same 2 friends who gave me the $200 3 months ago," he explained. "After I told them how I lost the money, they gave me another $200. To make sure that the money was safe, I came home and hid it inside the jar filled with grain, the same jar you traded for paint. Now we're as poor as we were before. What am I going to tell the 2 men? They'll think I'm a liar and a thief for sure." "Let them think what they want," his wife said calmly. "If it is our destiny to be poor, then we will be poor. Tell them the truth. That is all you can do." These words consoled the miller, and the next day he went to work as usual. Time passed, and one day the 2 wealthy friends returned to ask the miller how he had done with the second $200. When the miller saw them, he was afraid they would accuse him of being a liar and a spendthrift, but he was truthful and told them what had happened to the money. "I find your stories hard to believe," said one of the men. "I think you lost the money gambling, and that's why you're telling us these wild stories. Anyway," he continued, "I still believe that it is money and not luck that makes a man prosper." "Well, you certainly didn't prove your point by giving the money to this poor miller," his friend reminded him. "Good day, you unlucky man," he said to the miller. "Thank you, friends," the miller said. "Oh, by the way," said the man who believed in luck, "here is a piece of lead I've been carrying around. It is worthless to me, but maybe you can use it for something." Then the 2 men left, still debating their different points of view. Since the piece of lead was hardly worth anything, the miller thought nothing of it and put it in his jacket pocket. By the time he arrived home, he had forgotten about it. Part 3. Later that night, after the family had eaten and gone to bed, they heard a knock at the door. "Who is it? What do you want?" the miller asked. "It's me, your neighbor," a voice answered. The miller recognized the fisherman's voice. "I've come to ask you if you have any lead you can spare. I'm going fishing tomorrow, and I need the lead to weigh down the nets." The miller remembered the lead, got up, found it, and gave it to the fisherman. "Thank you very much, neighbor," he said. "I promise you the first fish I catch tomorrow will be yours." "Think nothing of it," the miller said and returned to bed. The next day he got up and went to work without thinking about the incident. But in the afternoon when he returned home, he found his wife cooking a big fish for dinner. "Since when are we so well off we can afford fish for supper?" he asked his wife. "Don't you remember that our neighbor promised us the first fish he caught?" his wife reminded him. "Well, this was the first fish he caught. So it's ours, and it's a beauty. But you should have been here when I cut it open. I found a large piece of glass in its stomach." "And what did you do with it?" "Oh, I gave it to the children to play with," she shrugged. When the miller saw the piece of glass, he noticed it shone so brightly it appeared to illuminate the room. But since he knew nothing about jewels, he didn't realize that it was valuable, and he left it with the children. But the bright glass was so attractive that the children were soon fighting over it and making a terrible noise. Now it happened that the miller and his wife had other neighbors who were jewelers. Part 4. The following morning, after the miller had left for work, the jeweler's wife visited the miller's wife to complain about all the noise her children had made. "I know, and I'm sorry, but you know how it is with children," the miller's wife explained. "Yesterday we found a beautiful piece of glass, and I gave it to my youngest child to play with, and when the others tried to take it away from him, he raised a storm." The jeweler's wife became very interested. "Will you show me that piece of glass?" she asked. "Of course. Here it is." "Ah, yes, it's a pretty piece of glass. Where did you find it?" "Our neighbor gave us a fish yesterday, and when I was cleaning it, I found the glass in its stomach." "Why don't you let me take it home for just a moment? You see, I have one just like it, and I want to compare them." "Yes, why not? Take it," answered the miller's wife. So the jeweler's wife ran off with the glass to show it to her husband. When the jeweler saw the glass, he instantly knew it was one of the finest diamonds he had ever seen. "It's a diamond," he exclaimed. "I thought so," his wife nodded eagerly. "What shall we do?" "Go tell the neighbor we'll give her $50 for it, but don't tell her it's a diamond." "No, no," his wife chuckled. "Of course not." She ran to her neighbor's house. "Ah, yes, we have one exactly like this," she told the miller's wife. "My husband is willing to buy it for $50, just so that we can have a pair, you understand." "I can't sell it," the miller's wife answered. "You will have to wait until my husband returns from work." Part 5. That evening when the miller came home from work, his wife told him about the offer the jeweler had made for the piece of glass. But why would they offer $50 for a worthless piece of glass? The miller wondered aloud. Before his wife could answer, they were interrupted by the jeweler's wife. "What do you say, neighbor? Will you take $50 for the glass?" she asked. "No, that's not enough," the miller said cautiously. "Offer more." "I'll give you 50,000, the jeweler's wife blurted out. "A little bit more," the miller replied. "Impossible," the jeweler's wife cried. "I can't offer any more without consulting my husband." She ran off to tell her husband how the bargaining was going, and he told her he was prepared to pay $100,000 to acquire the diamond. He handed her $75,000 and said, "Take this and tell him that tomorrow, as soon as I open my shop, he'll have the rest." When the miller heard the offer and saw the money, he couldn't believe his eyes. He thought that the jeweler's wife was jesting with him. But it was a genuine offer, and he received $100,000 for the diamond. The miller had never seen so much money, and all morning he thought about what he might do with it. That afternoon his wife asked him what he had decided to do with their new fortune. "I think I will start my own mill," he answered. "It will be like the one I operate now. Once I set up my business, we'll see how our luck changes." The next day he proceeded to buy everything he needed to establish his mill and to build a new house. Soon he had everything going. Part 6. 6 months passed since he had seen the two men who had given him the $400 and the piece of lead. He was eager to see them again and to tell them how the piece of lead had changed his luck and made him wealthy. Time passed and the miller prospered. His business grew and grew, and he even built a summer home where he could take his family on vacation. He had many employees who worked for him. One day while he was at his store, he saw the two men riding by. He rushed out into the street to greet them and asked them to come in. He was overjoyed to see them, and he was happy to see that they admired his store. "Tell us the truth," the man who had given him the $400 said. "You used that money to set up this business." The miller swore he hadn't, and he told them how he had given the piece of lead to his neighbor and how the fisherman had, in return, given him a fish with a very large diamond in its stomach. And he told them how he had sold the diamond. "That's how I was able to acquire this business," he said. "But it's time to eat. Let's eat, and then I'll show you everything I have now." The men agreed, but one of them still doubted the miller's story. So they ate, and then the three men rode out to see the miller's summer house. The house was on the other side of the river where the mountains were cool and beautiful. When they arrived, the men admired the place very much. It was such a peaceful place that they rode all afternoon through the forest. During their ride, they passed by a tall pine tree. "What is that on top of the tree?" one of them asked. "That's a hawk's nest," the miller replied. "I have never seen one. I would like to take a closer look at the nest." "Of course," the miller said, and he ordered a servant to climb up the tree and bring down the nest so that his friend could see how it was made. When the hawk's nest was on the ground, they examined it carefully. They noticed that there was a cloth bag at the bottom of the nest. When the miller saw the bag, he immediately realized that it was the same bag he had lost to the hawk that fought him for the piece of meat years ago. "You won't believe me, friends," he told them, "but I put almost all of the first $200 you gave me into this bag." "If it's the same bag," said the man who had doubted him, "then it stands to reason that the money the hawk took should be in the bag." "There's no doubt about that," the miller said. "Let's see what we find." The three of them examined the old, weather-beaten bag, and although it was full of holes, when they ripped it apart they found that the money was there. The two men remembered what the miller had told them, and they agreed that he was an honest man. Still, the man who had given him the money wasn't satisfied. He wondered what had really happened to the second $200 he had given the miller. They spent the rest of the day riding in the mountains and returned to the house very late. The servant in charge of feeding the horses suddenly realized that he had no grain for them. He ran to the barn and checked, but there was no grain for the hungry horses. So he ran to a neighbor and bought from him a large clay jar that was filled with grain. He carried the jar home and emptied the grain into a bucket to feed it to the horses. When he got to the bottom of the jar, he noticed a bulge that turned out to be something wrapped in a piece of cloth. He immediately went inside. "Master," he said, "look at this package that I found in a jar of grain which I just bought from our neighbor." The three men carefully unwrapped the cloth and found the other $190 that the miller had told them he had lost. That is how the miller proved to his friends that he was truly an honest man. And they had to decide for themselves whether it had been luck or money that had made the miller a wealthy man.